Body Safety Australia acknowledges and pays respects to all traditional custodians and elders of this nation and the continuation of cultural, spiritual and educational practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. This podcast was recorded in Naarm on Wurundjeri country of the Kulin Nation, and we acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Welcome to The Kids Are Okay, your go-to podcast for making the hard chats easier. I'm Lauren French.
And I'm Deanne Carson.
And today we're talking about pockets and other gendered crap.
And Lauren, I have been so looking forward to this one. And I love the title, Pockets and Other Gendered Crap. And I want to tell you a story about how this came about.
Deanne, story time. Everyone get comfortable.
But I know in this session we're going to talk really about early childhood. We've been talking lately a lot about secondary school and, puberty. And I really want to take it back to the foundational spaces that we work in. I want to tell a story about an early childhood centre that I visited a couple of years ago now. And I was early, and I like to get there a bit early so I can stop and watch the children play and just, get to know them a little bit. And the educator was setting up, and I was talking to one of the children, and I said, "What have you got in your pocket? What have you got in your pocket?" Because, children's pockets, right? They're full of, amazing, interesting things. And she said, "I don't have any pockets." And she was so indignant. And this sparked a conversation between the children about who had pockets, who didn't have pockets, what they had in their pockets. And I kept the conversation going about, what would you keep in your pockets if you had pockets? And the educator said to me later, why that conversation? What made you think
what was the point?
Yeah, what was the point of that conversation? I'm like, because it's gendered, right? In that conversation, what we saw is that the majority of people who had pockets were boys, and they had amazing things in their pockets. They had stones, they had feathers, they had dinosaurs, they had probably a bit of yesterday's lunch, just saving it. And they, felt great about being able to carry their treasures with them. And it was just so clear, for that educator in that moment that, we actually, we think that they're just wearing play clothes and they're here to play, but there actually is this gender divide happening already in this space with the 3-year-olds.
I love that story. And I think it's so just classic to the conversation, which is, gender with young people, of course, but we're going to talk about that when they're older. This is going to come up when we're maybe later primary, maybe secondary. It's something that happens later down the track because there's this lack of understanding of how gender is affecting them as soon as they're in early childhood, as soon as they're doing that play. And, sometimes you get the question of, well, why do we have to do the work so early? Because of their pockets.
Because of their pockets, exactly. In fact, actually, it starts before they're born, right? It starts when that first ultrasound happens. They're having a baby girl or, whatever it might be, and they start shopping. So they go, I know this little piece of information about my child who I already love, and now I want to buy things and create a space for them, that shows my love and care and excitement. And, of course, through marketing, they go, I need a pink pram and maybe I'll paint the walls purple with maybe white clouds because they're soft and fluffy, and that's what girls like. And so before the child is even born, they're stepping into this highly gendered world. So it's not just pockets.
Well, no, it's the entire environment, world space that they're in. I remember just feeling like something clicked into place when we were learning, when we were talking around where the advertisement changed and the connectedness to when they were doing ultrasounds and you got to find out the sex of the baby before they were born. And that conversation of things that you don't realise correlate but do.
Absolutely, because when I grew up, right, it was, we just got hand-me-downs. My mum didn't have routine ultrasound. She didn't know what sex we were going to be before we were born, and we just wore the same clothes. But by the time I had my children, everything was gendered. It was, buy the pink bike or the blue bike, buy the, pink sheets or the blue sheets, or maybe you can have green sheets. It was colours of clothes. It was, what was on the clothes. It was, like you're talking about 000 baby clothes that have got hammers and trucks and
dinosaurs.
And dinosaurs.
I love dinosaurs, but could never have anything with dinosaurs on it because it was not in the girls section of Kmart.
Correct. So let's fast forward this. Baby is born, everything is gendered, and it just, the older the child gets, the more it accelerates. So it's going into Kmart and you've got the boys section or the girls section. You've got glitter and rainbows, or you've got dinosaurs and trucks. And it's the activities they do. You can be enrolled in gymnastics or ballet, or you can be enrolled in footy or soccer, I don't know.
Sports. You can do sports.
Things with balls, right? You can do that.
Exactly. You can do things with balls. Yeah. Moving on.
That's right. And then, and then they move into kindergarten or preschool, and early childhood educators have set up this beautiful neutral space where all children can play with all things. We've got a sand pit, we've got painting, we've got, Play-Doh, and these things aren't gendered. So there's this understanding that children in early childhood aren't really absorbing these gendered messages because their early childhood education is neutral. But it's not enough that it's neutral, because they're coming from a world that is saturated. The shows that they watch, the advertising, the marketing, their world is saturated with messages about what a girl should be and how a girl should be and what a boy should be and how a boy should be. And anything that is outside of this really, really narrow definition of a good girl or a strong boy is kind of odd, or even, could I say, queer.
Yeah, you can indeed say queer. And there's definitely that view a lot of the time from the adults in the space that go, well, we're not forcing any of it on the young people. They come in and the boys play with the blocks because that's just what the boys want to do, and the girls want to play in the home corner because actually that's just what they want to do. And this view that, well, we're not going to force anything on them and we're not controlling anything for them. It's innately from them. But again, that's missing that piece, that it's not innately from nothing. It's because at 3, when they come in, they've already had 3 years of conditioning.
Absolutely. As adults, we're also so conditioned in this space, and even if we're professionals and we've done a lot of reading and learning, we've still absorbed these, kind of pseudoscience or pop psychology that says that, girls have pink brains and boys have blue brains, and
that it's biology, that it's just how it is.
Biology, that men are from Mars and women are from Venus, and it's like we're all actually from Earth, And so we have to undo this conditioning. Boys are not innately better at blocks than girls.
No. Have we ever stopped to think that maybe by the time that girl comes to early childhood, that every gift, every time a toy has been bought, something has been given to her, none of it was blocks or Legos. There was never a point in time where they were given an opportunity to practice a skill like building things into a tower. And now that girl has come into early childhood where there's all these boys already building these really tall towers. They know exactly how to do it because since they were born, they were given toys that allowed them to practice those skills. So now what are the girls going to do in that new environment as they're getting comfortable? Well, they're going to go to what's comfortable for them as well. And if all they were given in those spaces were, dolls or whatever it was, that's where they're then going to go to.
Because that's where they feel confident and
exactly.
Confident, absolutely. And even if they are given blocks, even if they've got that,
pink Barbie Lego set?
Yeah, pink Barbie, yeah, but if they've got that, like feminist aunt who goes, no, my niece is going to play with blocks, there's commentary around that tells the child that it's not okay. It's like, oh, your aunt gave you blocks. Well, of course she did. That's just like her, right? She thinks she's going to make like a tomboy out of you. And so that commentary tells the girl without telling the girl that, these are not for you. Okay, so we've established that children are saturated with gendered messages before they're even born, and that when they come into early childhood environments, they're carrying these messages with them, whether it's in their environment or not. What I want to talk about then is, well, how do we unpick this?
And where does the role start to play with the unpicking, with the unlearning, with the, the kind of questioning that educators almost need to do first? I feel that first piece is a little bit of the self-reflection of the gender bias you are bringing into the space as the educator. Because particularly in early childhood, if you've come from that mindset of everything's neutral, I've got my beautiful woods and my neutral tones and, this is a neutral space for everyone. Okay, great. But there's also a little bit of blindness there to what the young people are bringing in, what the families are bringing in, and the fact that, yes, you've made a neutral space, but that neutral space is not going to do the unlearning. That's you as the educator who's going to be stepping in to do that. But first, you kind of got to sit and go, okay, but what am I holding that might be influencing this? What's my language doing? How do I play with the children? Where's my gaze? All these things that we may have never noticed before or considered that hugely affect the gendered aspect of that learning.
I can't tell you the number of times that I've heard educators say, oh, I've got a large cohort of boys this year. Everyone, can you give me some suggestions on like big rough and tumble outdoor?
Because they're so boisterous.
Because they're so boisterous. It's like, that's really interesting. So hang on a second. You're making an assumption that all of these boys need lots and lots of rough and tumble outdoor boisterous play. Not that children need this, boys need it. And you're changing your entire curriculum to meet your perceived needs of these children based on their sex. And you're not also thinking about, well, what about the children who this is not their thing, right? It's not their jam, whether it be girls or some of the boys or, gender
any other young
children.
people.
Like, who knows? But all of this like assumption of like, I have a big cohort of boys, therefore I need lots of big, heavy work for them to do.
And even then, so let's say you do that. You have the large cohort of the boisterous young men and you send them outside because they need to be outside because they must run and be in dirt and do all the things. Even then thinking, okay, but how as an educator do I then relate to the young people, work with the young people outside versus inside?
Yeah.
And you have educators who go, oh, but I'm the same. And you go, And then you talk around, you get them to think, deeply reflect and realize, oh yeah, actually I'm more of an observer outside. They lead, they do the thing, but I kind of step back because they're in play outdoors. Inside, I come into the play with them, I sit down, I ask curious questions, I get more involved. And so if we're in that situation where I've sent all the boys outside and they're doing all this work outside without any of this educator interaction, but the girls are inside with me and we're having all of this, separate education space, I mean, there's such a clear difference there than what the outcomes we're going to have for those young people.
Absolutely. So what happens in that space is the assumption that an educator is made based on the sex of the children means that the boys will develop gross motor skills, right? And they will continue to excel in their gross motor skills. The girls will develop fine motor skills. The boys will learn to resolve their own conflict, and often that resolution, because developmentally they don't have the skills, is physical, right? The girls will learn better social emotional skills, and so then we have children entering school where we're saying, oh, look at the girls, they're so good, they sit quietly, they know how to resolve an argument with their friends about who gets to have the pink pencil because everybody wants the pink pencil, right? And the boys don't have those skills, and we're putting it down to their innate inability to do that, but we haven't given them those skills.
No, and then they're constantly pulled up on behaviour. They're given more negative feedback, they're given that criticism on behaviour, as we said, a skill they haven't learned. And then you've got the girls who are getting, less criticism, but also less instruction, less, time with their educators because of that focus being on these uncontrollable boys.
Yeah, but let's wind this back, because I want to make clear that what we're suggesting is not going, right, boys can't go outside or girls have to go outside, right? what we're talking about here is making sure that every child, every single child, regardless of gender, regardless of how they express their gender, has an opportunity to become confident and competent in any area that they're interested in.
And I think that's where we're getting to, which is the difference between gender neutral spaces and a space that is void of gender, and the idea of no, we have to acknowledge gender where they're at with it, the gendered messages they've received. But if we want them to have that same, equal playing field, as often people say, you can't ignore the gender. The gender's there whether you acknowledge it or not. Not acknowledging it just means that we haven't set up young people for success.
Yeah. And I think that everyone can get on board with what we're saying, right?
Hope so.
I hope so. But here's where the sticky points come, because everyone's like, yeah, I'd love to encourage my girl to go outside and play with mud and, climb trees and do those adventurous things. And often we see parents saying these words, I'd love my girl to go outside and play and run and jump and climb and all of those things. And yet they're sending them to preschool in long fairy dresses where, the minute they get on the tricycle, there's
that tool is just caught up in all of the bits.
Right. So they can't, so they can't do the thing that they want to do because the very clothes that they're wearing, the clothes without pockets, are hampering them from having those free childhoods. But I want to talk more about what do we do? What do we do when we say, yes, everything is for everybody, and a boy wants to wear the fairy dress? What do we do then?
And I think when we talk about that, what do we do? We're in a situation, I'm an educator, I've created this space, I'm doing all this work, and of course the boy can wear the fairy dress and that's amazing, and then you have a situation where there's push on that because someone's sitting in a place of fear. And I want to be really clear that there's a need for compassion for those people who are sitting in fear. And sometimes, particularly the educator, when you want to do the great work and you're feeling really, empowered over it and passionate about it, sometimes we want to meet those people in anger. We want to meet them, in hardness and tension and debate.
Zero tolerance policy.
Yeah. And, part of me loves that. But also what we're lacking is the compassion and the understanding that we're not going to make that child's life safer or more inclusive or more understanding by meeting with argument and defiance. What we actually have to do is meet those people wherever they're at with the thank you so much for coming to me with this and letting me know. I had no idea that was where we were sitting. Let's create dialogue around it and conversation. Let's go, what is the fear? Can I ask what the concern is with the fairy dress for your child? Because also don't assume you know what the fear is, because the fear might be sitting in homophobia and a real fear of that. It might be sitting in a fear of bullying for the child. It might be sitting in a cultural place, a religious place. Like, you don't actually know where the fear is until you ask the question.
Yeah. And once you ask the question, once you gain understanding, then you can provide information, you can continue the dialogue, you can bring that parent on a journey that's going to last that child's entire life instead of just that one day where the fairy dress was the issue.
Exactly. And it might not feel as satisfying in the moment for you as the big argument sometimes does, but it is the longevity. We are talking about how to make that young person's life as safe and positive and all of those things as possible.
Yep.
Which is the ongoing conversation. And also the recognition that whatever that person's fear is, you might not be the best person to address it with them. And as the educator, you're going to have a role to play because that child is with you, and, you can probably talk about, best practice with young people, and you can talk about curriculum, and you can talk about why best practice is best practice. But if they're coming from a place of religion or culture or, whatever it might be that you're not a part of, there's also an element where, hey, who do I know in the space? Who are the organisations I know? Where are the places I can direct them to that is going to do the work better than I actually could?
Love that. A couple of things that I wanted to talk about, before we wrap up, Lauren, is the first one is how then do we, when children start policing gender, which they do, right, developmentally as they hit 3-4 years old and they're starting to classify things in their life.
Categorize.
Yeah, they're starting to go, well, this is something that girls do and this is something that boys do, right? How do educators or parents in that space address that when children are the ones who are saying, you can't play here because you're a boy, or I'm not playing with Lego friends because that's for girls.
Yeah, it's something that comes up quite a lot, and I've had educators tell me in play that there'll be spaces that all the children play in all the time until it's the fairy corner, and as soon as it becomes the fairy corner, there's policing. Boys aren't allowed in. This is a girls' fairy corner space, and sometimes the adults will sit and say, "Oh, but their home life isn't like that," or when we talk about, their representation of gender isn't like that. Dad cooks dinner all the time, therefore we don't need to address the huge domestic labour that women do in households. Like, there's but it's not for us as individuals, without that understanding that young person isn't just getting the messages from, what they see at home or what they see at kinder or the centre that they're in. It's coming from everywhere, so it needs to be addressed. Now, as the educator, it can feel a bit uncomfortable to step in and realise, there's a real strongly held gender belief here that this young person is kind of putting up a hand and saying, no, you can't do that. That first little step of a simple, why not? Why can't boys go into that fairy cave? Why not that? A bit of curiosity with the young person as well to see where, even to tease out their why. Because again, you might not actually fully know the child's why of where that genderness is coming from.
I think the curiosity is really important because, for the child, they're trying to, as you say, classify things and understand, who's allowed to play with what, and they're reinforcing what they've seen online or on television. And having an educator step in and go, tell me about that. I'm really curious. Have you ever seen a boy or a man doing that thing? And giving the child the opportunity to reflect and go, actually, no, this is something I mostly see girls do, but it is for everybody.
And then even then, I've seen amazing spaces where educators will go, a child said, but that's for girls. And an educator goes, I'm a girl and I really don't like doing that. And giving them that opportunity because maybe they've been curious, they've asked, and that child has said, well, no, because, that's only a boys thing. I've only ever seen boys do that. And for that educator to then step in and go, but I do that. Or I don't, to give them that example, to be the modelled behaviour in front of them so that they can start to shift their worldview and go, okay, well, that doesn't go into this policing space I have. Okay, I need to actually broaden my worldview because my educator who I connect with and who I have a relationship with, rapport with, who I have all these feelings with, okay, great.
She rides a motorbike.
Yep. Okay, well, now I have to completely change my perception of motorbikes being for boys.
Yep.
Because she rocks a motorbike.
And it's not telling children that they're wrong. It's just gently challenging their thinking around that. The other thing that I wanted to raise is the fact that the children are going from these beautiful early childhood settings where the setting is reasonably neutral, as we've just said, to school. And this is what we know about primary schools. Most primary schools, there's a large oval, and that's where the boys play. There are monkey bars, and that's where the girls play. And, there might be, asphalt that's got basketball courts or, foursquare or,
the sports stuff.
This balls again.
Balls,
yeah. And again, we rarely see children of all genders in that space. It's usually boys, maybe a couple of brave girls, right? And what I know about those spaces is 90% of that physical environment is boys' stuff. And only 10% of it is girls' stuff. And so they're going into these spaces where they've got gendered uniforms, where, in some schools they've got rules around how long your hair can be or, whether you're allowed to have pierced ears or, based on whether you've got male or female on your enrolment form.
Yeah.
Right? So how does an early childhood educator or a parent of a preschool-aged child prepare their child for such a highly gendered physical environment?
And it's so interesting to think about because you've got early childhood being this space of school readiness. We're getting them ready for school. We're getting them prepared to be at school and to, work out where they're putting bags and this, and so that we're setting them up for success of being in school. And yet, none of that conversation is around the gender element. None of that conversation is around the difference because, in early childhood, we're not talking about gendered bathrooms and we're not talking about gendered clothes, in a uniform sense. And instantly then that young person maybe is set up to do their Velcro shoes and have their bag and they know how to put their lunch away. But then they go into an environment where they will very quickly realise, even though they have been told they can be anything and be anyone, and maybe they're in a schooling environment that also says, of course, everyone can be everyone. They will be around people who, if they are the boy with the long hair,
People will ask, are you a boy or a girl?
Mm-hmm.
All the time, until that child gets the message that if I'm going to do boy properly,
Mm-hmm.
I have to cut my hair.
I did ask educators once this, and it was really, they really sat with it because I went, if you're that child who has to, as soon as you get into prep, there's a fight. Every day there's a push, there's a fight, and it could just be every day there's a hair conversation. Even if you did, you're that young person who go, no, I'm going to have long hair, and you just keep going. How exhausted are you by year 6?
So exhausted. And I just don't think that it happens that often. I mean, I've worked in really fabulous schools where, children by year 3 are cutting their hair because they're just exhausted. They're done. They're done having to stand up for themselves, of being able to be a boy and have long hair and just be at school.
Because it's exhausting. And the girls who are going on the oval to do cartwheels and to do, flips and to roll and to sit and to use it for how they want, are then, being called out to say, you're using the oval wrong.
Yep, you're using it wrong. Or if they do want to use it right, i.e. play with balls, play football or soccer or whatever it is, they're still policed. Oh, you can't kick as high, you can't kick as fast, you don't know what you're doing, you don't know the rules. And that's exhausting. How much courage does it take to be someone who is perceived as a girl to go onto the oval at a school and take up space in a boy's space? All right. Lauren, we've kind of skirted around this in our conversation. We've talked a lot about boys and girls, and we've talked a lot about, the perception of masculinity and femininity. But of course, in all of this, we also have to talk about the impact of reinforcing gender norms or breaking down gender stereotypes and how it benefits gender non-conforming children and transgender children.
And when we talk about benefits, we're not talking about a leg up on everyone else. We're talking about benefits as in safety and inclusion and actually, giving those young people what they need.
Right. They don't get a free car and a trip to Disneyland.
Be good if they did, though.
It'd be pretty awesome. No. Absolutely. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about, when we challenge gender, around not having gendered bathrooms, or challenge the school about inter-school sports being split into boys and girls for 5-year-old children. When we challenge that, we benefit cisgender children. But the benefit for the gender non-conforming and transgender children is enormous, because it's a space where for one moment they don't have to have their heart in their mouth going, is it okay for me to go to the toilet today? Am I able to join in, PE because, I don't have the right uniform, but actually now all of our uniforms are exactly the same. It doesn't matter what gender you are. So maybe, just maybe, I can do PE today.
It's the invisible barriers you as the educator, you might not be seeing, because they're not barriers in front of you, or they're not barriers that you've ever had to deeply consider, and so it's a little invisible to you. But there are hundreds of those in front of that young person. And what we're talking about today is, how do we help remove some of them or make them clearer so that you understand, oh, that actually exists. I hadn't thought about it before. Okay, this is an option that would get rid of that barrier.
Yeah. So no more. I remember when my children were little, there was a space that they were in where the educator sat them boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl. And at the time I thought, oh, that's pretty cute, right? Because then we're all making friends with each other. But in retrospect, what does that do to the gender non-conforming child or the transgender child? And also now knowing what I know, it's like a little bit of like, are the girls interspersed between the boys to help them behave, right? Because this is what we do in gender, right? We ask girls to be responsible for hashtag not all boys, but some boys' behaviour, when actually that's the adult's job.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right. Need to wrap up, but really curious to see what's in question box, Lauren.
Let's have a little look. I don't know what the question box music is. I haven't actually seen any of them. So in question box today, something that I know both of us have been asked this question multiple times in different sessions by different people, by different educators, because they hear this stuff and they have these deep conversations, reflections, and, because we're talking about early childhood, they turn around and go, so does this mean we need more male educators in the room?
Ah, the old male educator.
The classic male educator.
Okay. I have really strong feelings about this.
Thought you might.
What I want to say is a good educator is a good educator. And what we often find with male educators is that one of two things happen. They are never treated as another good educator. They are either deified. Oh, wow, we're so lucky to have this male educator. He's so awesome. He's better than all of the rest of the girls, right? Because we use that language. And we're so lucky, and that's fantastic, and we're going to make him director with 2 years experience because, we're so lucky to have him, right? So he's put on a pedestal, which is really unfair. Unfair to everybody. Or the other thing that happens is that we go, oh, male educators, I don't know why a man would want to be in early childhood education. We can't have him changing nappies because men and babies' genitals, and obviously he's going to be predatory. And that's not okay because only women can be nurturing. Like, both of those things are really unfair and really wrong. So do we need diverse role models for children in early childhood? Yes, we do. Do we need, all of the beautiful diversity? Yes, we do. Does that include men? Absolutely. Yes, it does. But I never, ever hear people saying, we need more educators from a Southeast Asian background because they need, the children need strong role models from Southeast Asian, cultures, right? So let's not kid ourselves that this is about role modelling. And let's just go, actually, educators are educators. What are your qualifications? What are your skills? And how do you work with the children? Because that will tell me whether you're a good educator or not.
And moving away from that idea that, well, I've got the large cohort of boisterous boys, so I've got to get the male educator in because that's the only way that they're going to respond to an educator.
Totally. I worked with a male educator who was really frustrated because he enjoyed working in early childhood education, but he was only ever offered roles in the 3 and 4 year old room because there was this perception that, that he needed to work with the boisterous, and he actually wanted to work with the babies.
But I bet his uniform at that early childhood centre has so many pockets.
True.
Well, thank you for potting with me, Deanne, and having all of the incredible chats today. I hope people who have been listening have been able to, probably sit in a space of reflection, and you might be realising, I do that, I say that, I've said that before. And I really don't want anyone listening to be too harsh on themselves from this. Like, this is a space where we are learning and we are growing and we are adapting from what we know. And so don't beat yourself on the back around, I did a boys line up, girls line up. But maybe we don't do that again.
No, be excited. Go share it with your colleagues.
Like and subscribe. No. So thank you for listening and sitting with us, and we will be seeing you all lovely people next week. I'm Lauren French.
And I'm Deanne Carson.
And don't forget, the kids are okay. Thanks for joining us this week and making space for these hard chats. Thanks to our amazing podcast producer, Jay Jones, our podcast editor, Sam Carson, and our incredible composer of this music and all music you'll hear, Jade Perry. If you want us to answer your question box questions, head to our Instagram at Body Safety Australia and follow the link in our bio.